Okay, you can see it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I guess we should get started then. Sound good, everybody?
All right. So we are in the process of.
Okay, you can see it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we should get started then. Mine's doing the weird echo thing. How did you stop that, Demir? Is it still echoing? Okay. No. Okay. So, all right. Hello and welcome. My name is Ashera. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist out of Buffalo, New York. It is an honor and a privilege to be part of this event today. So I would like to open with a brief poem by Alice Walker. This poem is called SM. I tell you, chickadee, I am afraid of people who cannot cry. Tears left unshed turn to poison in the ducts. Ask the next soldier you see enjoying a massacre if this is not so. People who do not cry are victims of soul mutilation, paid for in Marlboros and trucks. Resist. Violence does not work except for the man who pays your salary, who knows if you could still weep, you would not take the job. Okay. So today I would like to talk about storytelling. Specifically, the stories we tell about partner violence that are helpful and unhelpful. I'd like to utilize the power of myth and archetype to gain a better understanding of how deeply ingrained these stories are. But more importantly, I'd like to explore the myths of dissent and how they can be used as a call for change. So I'm going to lecture for about 10-15 minutes, and then I want to open this up for discussion. So before we jump in, I'd like to speak briefly on my qualifications and the lenses in which I will be unpacking the topics at hand. So to make sure I'm representing myself as accurately as possible. As a marriage and family therapist, I am a systems thinker. Unlike the discipline of psychology, which delves deep into an individual's mind, seeking understanding and potential diagnosis, a systems thinker seeks to understand patterns of interaction between people in relationship to one another, be it partners, family members, or group identification. I make this distinction because partner violence is dependent on relationship structures that are systemically enforced by other relationships. This means that the cancer of partner violence is not isolated into perpetrators or victims, i.e., other people's problems, but is indicative of a far larger pathology in which we all may unknowingly be complicit at some point. Systems thinking does not only interest me academically, but also mystically. I identify as a spiritual naturalist and find wonder in the sacred patterns in which we dance. I believe that we are privy to some of these patterns, but cannot see them all. I place myself under the umbrella of solitary pagan. I am not quite theistic, but not atheistic. I tend to dwell in nuance. I find solace in ritual and prayer, and as I feel connected to a greater unity, what Jung would call the collective unconscious. In the interest of accessibility, I chose a myth that is relatively well known. I do not want to misrepresent myself as a scholar of mythology in any way, shape, or form, and am open to discussion about the ideas I present today. My earnest hope is to draw awareness to the stories we tell, and if others wish to responsibly apply such ideas to other mythological canon, I readily welcome this. As a therapist, I utilize many different tools to assist my clients in gaining awareness of the patterns that ensnare them. The premise of most, if not all, systems thinking is to understand patterns and to modify them. Structural therapy, for instance, aims to alter an identified patient's entire family, subsystem by subsystem, to promote change. Cognitive behavioral therapy quite literally maps thought patterns that must be changed, broken. In narrative therapy, one of my very favorite paradigms marries storytelling with healing, allowing one to put themselves in a greater context. It is on narrative therapy techniques that I wish to focus my academic skill set today. Placing trauma into a narrative has been shown to diminish the effects of trauma. By integrating the logical left brain and the emotional right brain, a person can put themselves and their experience into a greater context. Parenting experts Dan T. Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson outline how to integrate this practice with children in their groundbreaking book, The Whole Brain Child. In their book, they discuss the importance of teaching children to tell the story of a painful or confusing event, often repeatedly. They tell the events of small traumas like bee stings and scraped knees to greater pains, such as the death of family members, car crashes, or moving away. The evidence shows that by repeating the stories and incorporating more details each time, children are able to come to terms with the events. They don't experience the same amount of psychological distress they do if the events are never spoken of and left as a surprising anomaly. Siegel and Bryson are far from alone in espousing these findings. I have seen the power of this firsthand in my work with couples. One of my specialties is working with couples who are healing from an affair. Early in this process, I find the dominant story that the couple tells of the event. Each person often tells their own story. The injured partner, the more traumatized individual, often tells a story that goes something like this. Everything was fine and then it wasn't. This is deeply confusing and troubling, and nearly impossible to move forward from. It is my job to open the story up, so to speak. So I will ask about the troubles the couple were experiencing prior to the affair, and when the injured partner began to realize that there was a problem. Slowly, we begin to build a new story, often one that acknowledges that both parties were very isolated and hurt. This certainly does not excuse the affair, but it does put it into context. It goes from being an extreme disruption to a series of painful events that build off of one another. And once the story makes sense and is not an emotional explosion, both the parties can work on healing the issues that culminated into the problem in the first place. The story can continue in a much different way than it had previously, and the couple is empowered to write it themselves. The takeaway from this is that the healing occurs in the retelling. However, stories can also be limiting, isolating, and ultimately damaging. One of the most pernicious facets of an abuser-victim relationship is the abuser's ability to alter the story through gaslighting. For those unfamiliar with the term, gaslighting refers to systematic emotional abuse designed to make a person feel crazy. The name is derived from the 1940 film Gaslight, in which a woman's husband slowly manipulates her into believing she is insane by altering her environment. He knowingly changes the levels on the gaslight lamps, and when she remarks on the change, tells her there is no difference. The woman slowly begins to question herself on small things, making it easier to slip larger and larger lies past her. This tactic is a hallmark of the cycle of abuse and begins to play into the negative narrative the victim begins to believe about themselves. The idea that intimate partner violence is isolated, excusable, or that a victim is somehow responsible for the abuse they suffer is a harmful and salient myth. Also, that one can just leave anytime they want to, or that abusers or victims look a certain way. According to the CDC, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men in the US will experience violence at the hands of their partner at some point in their lives. Victims and abusers come from all class backgrounds, all races, and all walks of life. The unfortunate truth is that most anyone is capable of falling into the trap of partner violence. It's high time we find a healthier narrative about it. But before we get into the ways we retell the stories we walk through today, I'd like to shift gears a little bit and begin to explore some myths about descent, those of Inanna and later of Persephone. Unlike Persephone, Inanna descends into the unknown on her own accord to seek wisdom from her dark sister Ereshkigal. The Sumerians did not share later Christians' bias towards light, but saw the dark as a comfortable place to seek wisdom. Of this, author Halaha Bonheim writes, "Perhaps this is why we often find it so difficult to believe that our own journeys of descent into the dark realms of grief, loss, depression, and confusion can truly be more than meaningless glitches or shameful mistakes best tucked away in the secret corners of our memory." Inanna's journey is rife with violence. At each layer of the underworld, she is stripped of more of the magical amulets she brought to protect her. Eventually, she arrives at the shrine of her sister, who slaughters her and hangs her naked and abused body on a meat hook. After 3 days, she is resurrected back to life and ascends to higher wisdom. Historically speaking, the tale of Persephone is a retelling of Inanna's story. But the sacred rite is replaced with a story of female subjugation and violence. Bonheim points out, her story raises questions of how her suffering might have been prevented and whom to hold responsible, the very questions every victim of sexual abuse ponders. Very importantly, we cannot understand Persephone without understanding Demeter. Demeter was the fourth consort of Zeus, and this union produced Persephone, to whom she is linked in myth. Zeus gave Hades permission to kidnap Persephone and take her as his wife. When Persephone is abducted while gathering with her friends in a field, Demeter searches the earth tirelessly. Persephone's companions are given wings to search the earth for her. Unsuccessful, they become the sirens, luring men to their death with their song. In an adjacent, very troubling myth, Demeter is seen and desired by Poseidon during her search and ultimately raped by him. Demeter's luck does not change until she meets with Hecate, goddess of the dark moon. Hecate and Demeter meet with Helios, who informs them of Persephone's fate. He tells Demeter to stop weeping and that Hades is not an unworthy son-in-law. Demeter does not heed this advice. Instead, she withdraws from Olympus and halts the season so nothing may be born or grow. Demeter's protestations were ultimately semi-successful. Zeus, who along with Hades is responsible for all this nonsense, agrees to give Persephone back to her mother for 2/3 of the year. The reason being is that Persephone ate 4 pomegranate seeds while entrapped in Hades, chaining her to the underworld. Demeter is an archetypal mother, endlessly loving, yet susceptible to repeated violence. Her bounty is given without expectation until her daughter is subjugated to the whims of an oppressive father. Her story is the embodiment of multi-generational abuse, a mother subjected to violence who cannot spare her child from it. In order to right the wrongs against her, to break the cycle, Demeter must aggressively set boundaries and relentlessly search for her child. It should be noted that the archetype of loving mother may have a hidden wellspring of untapped rage. Persephone, on the other hand, becomes a transformative goddess. In myth, Persephone begins her journey as a child woman, virgin, innocent, and unaware of her own beauty and on the existence of predators. Her descent into the underworld is abrupt. She is essentially kidnapped and raped, sold into this torment by a distant father. She emerges from the underworld as its queen, now guiding others into their descent, which marries her pre-kidnapping kindness with the hard-earned wisdom she has gained. Of this, Bonheim writes, women's stories of sexual wounding and healing unfold in the tension between the two truths embodied by Inanna and Persephone. While Persephone is woman as victim, Inanna is woman as initiate and priestess. When a woman first confronts her history of abuse, she usually identifies with Persephone, the maiden trapped in a catastrophic onslaught of traumatic events. She rarely has a sense of participating in a universal drama, let alone in a spiritual initiation. She knows only that something has happened to her that should not have happened, that she did not want, that she would give anything to undo. Of course, Violence is not an initiate rite and should not be interpreted as such. However, each person has a choice in how they respond to that trauma, and to rob them of choice robs them of agency. To resign to the violence or to walk through the fire. It is through this change that victims are forged into survivors. We see this most potently in activism, where survivors find great meaning in lifting one another up and healing along their path. Their gratefulness found in fellowship does not diminish the traumas they've endured. This brings us to the crux of the matter. How do we retell the stories that haunt us? Is it a purposeful thing, or does change just happen to us? I can't dictate this. We can look to our heroines in myth and wonder, what if Persephone gorged herself on the food of Hades? What if Demeter accepted her daughter's fate? What if Inanna turned back right at the gates of the underworld? Where would they be? Where would we be? The myths of intimate partner violence, that the victim somehow deserves it. This is not our business. It's a family matter, so we should leave it alone, are limiting stories. They create endless, unspeakable pain. While we may know cognitively that these stories are false, many survivors still grapple with the haunting emotional shadow that it's somehow their fault, years still after the fact. Silence allows pain to fester, and the only way to shed a dysfunctional story is to tell a better one. What stories do you tell? How can you shift them? Let the stories of Persephone, Inanna, and Demeter be a call of action to you to be mindful of this. If you hear misinformation about partner violence, you can correct it. If you have endured partner violence and healed from it, you may speak out so others may find solace in your voice. If you are walking in the fire right now, you can challenge the stories you are told. You do not deserve this. There is a life outside of this. You are loved and you are cherished, just as you are. By telling our stories, we not only heal ourselves, we begin to heal those in relation to us. It is time to honor those who have descended and returned. How will you honor their hard-won wisdom? And stop share. So I would like to open that up for discussion. If anyone would like to, just any initial reflections, anything that came to mind. And then we can kind of go from there. Okay. Is there a common origin to abuse myths? I am not an expert on myth. I'm not sure if there's a common origin. I do think it's really telling, though, that like if you look at the difference between Inanna and you look at the difference of Persephone, that Inanna chooses to go down this path, right? And Persephone, she's continually trapped in this cycle. Like there's a much heavier overtone of do what you're told. She does resist, her and Demeter do resist, but they kind of have to compromise with the powers that be. And we don't base our civilization, we don't base Western culture on the Sumerians. We do on the Greeks. So that's I think that's just interesting. But I chose this myth particularly. I would feel like it was culturally appropriative of me to speak on myths that are not heavily recognized in Western culture. like, I don't want to go and reinterpret, say, like a Haudenosaunee myth or a myth from like um like the Nawat people, like that would feel really appropriative to me. So I don't really want to speak on that. Anybody else? And you're welcome to turn your mics off and like talk with me if you're moved to do so.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I was curious about the Persephone from Kore to Persephone myth, and how she, in the end, takes her power back. Would you say that would be part of the healing process? That even though she's been told what to do and she still had technically her own power to take control of the situation, as it were?
Yeah, for sure. And I think like that's what like she comes back a different woman, and that's a good thing. Because if she stayed this like virginal maiden forever, she would always be susceptible to violence. Like that's sort of an unfortunate lesson. But Persephone, she has to walk with this trauma for the rest of her life. She has to return to it quite literally for a third of the year. But instead of being like, oh man, I'm trapped in the dungeon in Hades, like she's like, I'm its queen now. And if you want me to walk through this trauma with you, I will. So I think that speaks to like sort of the power of survivors.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did anyone have any reactions about like retelling our stories, or would anyone be comfortable sharing about like how they see like the like dysfunctional myths of partner violence playing out and how they could be retold? Go ahead.
So I really liked the attention that was paid to the systemic level that was evident in the myth. And I think that it's super consistent with the need for call out, recognizing the role that Zeus played and that Poseidon played, and that even that Helios played in having to make this be rectified. And so I think something that's important here that like really grabbed me was the fundamental difference in character and orientation for Helios versus Zeus or Poseidon or even Hades that would make that figure in particular resonate in a way and really kind of change the trajectory of that course.
Right. And I mean, plenty of people that have experienced partner violence, they know that like abusers don't just abuse their one victim, they gaslight everyone around them. So when they do speak out and they're like, this person abused me, people tend to be like, he's not so bad, like he wouldn't do that to you. Like there becomes this chorus of, are you sure you're remembering that right? To try and, because people don't want to necessarily acknowledge that they've let a wolf into their house. I also think it's really interesting, to a sidebar, that Helios is a god of light, and he's like, yeah, like, no, it's cool, like she should totally be married to him. And then they've got Hecate, this goddess of darkness, sort of like this like other Inanna figure that's like, no, we're gonna meet at the crossroads, we're gonna go get her, like let's figure this out. And I'm like, okay, I'm really loving this dark goddess vibe.
So like it's almost kind of like Helios represented that let it happen narrative that is thrown around. So I see it, I'm aware, this is what is happening verbatim, but that's not necessarily a problem or a source of concern.
Yeah, he's a little bit of a victim. Like, I mean, we could totally like put victim blaming there. We could rewrite that conversation with so many of the things that we see when a sexual assault and allegation comes up. Like, so like why was she hanging out in that field anyway? Like, why, what is she doing there thinking that's okay? Why didn't her friends stop him if this was so scary? When that doesn't really acknowledge um the realities of what abuse looks like in our communities.
One of the things that I'm also kind of thinking about is when it comes to the entire Duluth model or the cycle of violence, the role that like, so a lot of these characters were in on it together. So that's like a social environmental kind of thing. And then within herself as a character, Persephone being in the situation, having to make decisions about whether or not she's going to eat any of the pomegranate or stay hungry or whatever those circumstances are. That kind of talks to me about the resourcefulness that leads to this inevitable display of resilience that all survivors have in common.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you bring up a really good point with the pomegranate seeds of the choice to eat those, because I mean, it's that could go back into the victim blaming place of like, well, why didn't she just starve then if it's so bad? And it's like, well, you're putting somebody in a really terrible situation of you can die or not die. um, uh, which is like again that sort of like a lot of those responses to violence of sure some people have a fight response that is like crazy cornered wild animal. A lot of people much more often have a fawn or a freeze response, um, where they're just like fawning is one that we're just starting to talk about instead of fight flight freeze. Yeah. um Fawning would be when a person sort of tries to de-escalate the situation by catering to their abuser, being like, no, you're totally right, like everything is just fine. Like you see that play out, and then people are like, well, why wouldn't you just stand up to him? If I'm getting this, then I'm going to stand up to the person. It's like, no, you won't. No, you won't. When your life is at stake, you will eat the pomegranate seed. You will yum yum. This was the best damn pomegranate seed I've ever had, and try and get out of that situation unscathed.
So I'm totally here for that. I totally agree. And like just to clarify, in this case, the pomegranate seed or any of the underworld food is metaphor for kind of staying here, doing what you got to do, getting the best that you can out of the situation while you strategize the next step or the next best case scenario for removal from the situation. It's totally functional. If that is that what I'm hearing?
Well, yeah, and I mean, think about it. Like she had, while she was faced with starvation um what or death or staying there, she she could have seen the feast that was prepared down there and been like, well, it's totally over. My mother's never going to find me. I'm stuck here. Let's like sit and let's feast and let's just like go full force into this. But she didn't. Like there was, even up until that point, there was still that hope of I will be found. I will get out of this. I can get out of this. This is not forever. I'm going to do I'm going to try and preserve my way out of this situation as much as possible, which I think is like something that we don't really talk about. There's when we see someone that is being abused, there's a lot of sort of the victim blaming comes from people right around them that are often really well-meaning. They're like, well, I'm just going to cut them out of my life because if they're going to make these decisions, then blah, 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 like, then they have to lay in their bed. And then the abuser always wins because then they have no support system. But a lot of people are trying to figure out a way out after a while. And it's so important to acknowledge that someone that's stuck in partner violence is the expert on their situation. And they can't, like, just getting up and leaving would potentially end their life. So it's really important to acknowledge that they will know when go time is. They will know how to leave. And if they decide to go back, that might actually be preserving their life. You don't know their abuser the way they do. They have a PhD in being abused by that specific person. So if they're like, he's stalking me, it's better to just go back for a while and endure, then there's probably a good reason for that doesn't make sense to an outsider. So does anyone have anything else they'd like? Otherwise, I've got another small reading. I'll share my screen again. And I will leave my contact information in case anyone wants to reach out and process with me any further. So first of all, I want to give a shout out to, these are books that informed this presentation. I wholeheartedly recommend all of them. I pulled from all of them. I quoted Bonheim from Aphrodite's Daughters the most, but I picked from all of them. Bonheim just really said it so beautifully that I couldn't paraphrase it. It would be an injustice to try and make it up and get to the same point. So, here is something to close. Some closing words by Alice Walker. Love is not concerned with whom you pray or where you slept the night you ran away from home. Love is concerned that the beating of your heart should kill no one. So thank you so much for everyone that took time to join us today. It's been awesome sharing my thoughts with you. If you would like to connect with me, you are welcome to email me, asheramft@protonmail.com. I also have a column that I have been neglecting, but I'm getting back into, called Smash Talks on Queen City, not a spelling error, and where I write about all things marriage and family therapy. So feel free to reach out. Feel free to chat, process. I'm cutting back on my social media presence, so I'm not really connecting with people on there. I'm mindfully disconnecting from there, so that's not really the best avenue to reach me. But I do check my email daily. So thank you so much. And thank you, Phoenix, for inviting me to be a part of this event.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. That was a beautiful mix of spirituality and realness. And that's kind of what I've come to rely on when it comes to working with you. I would also like to say that your writings are phenomenal, and I enjoy the perspective that you write from, and it's very dynamic, and it's appropriate for folks who are in our generation who are making the same observations and are feeling validated or invalidated by the same things. It's really great to see that voice reflected in the media. So I do definitely recommend checking out Ashera's stuff. Check out her Venmo at Ashera-Ruth. Go ahead and hit that off. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Bye.